coming up on 5 past. So welcome everyone. It's just terrific to see everybody here. Amazing, connecting across time zones. Thank you all for joining us. We have a pretty full program tonight, so my intro is going to be brief. So first of all, I want to let you all know that tonight's program design is a collaborative effort by the 76 Connects design team. And those members are Bob Howard, Steve Ehrlich, Wendy Mantell, Charlie Fitzgerald, Mark Brown, Andy Friedman, and myself. And we arrived at the title, The Liberal Arts in the Brave New World of Work. And in several meetings, we decided that the best way to do this was a kind of a conversation. So what we're going to do tonight is first, we want to hear from our alma mater by inviting Emily Griffin and Charlotte DeMittner to share their perspectives on the liberal arts and the world of work today. Emily, as I think most of you know, is the executive director of Amherst Loeb Center for Career Exploration and Planning. And Charlotte, who I'm delighted to welcome tonight, is a junior, class of 2025. And true to Amherst form, she is a triple major, economics, political science, and German, with an interest in public service. And I'm guessing that this session tonight is pulling her away from a mountain of reading she needs to do. So the first of many thanks to you, Charlotte.
Absolutely, so, I'm happy to be here.
For the second part, we wanted to turn the conversation around and share our perspectives as the class of 76 by inviting 6 of our classmates to reflect on the role of the liberal arts in their careers. And our hope is that this shared wisdom will be useful to Amherst students today. I think our comments are going to be clipped and massaged, and our hope is that with Emily's magic, it might be part of a blog that will serve as our gift of wisdom to students today. And so I'm delighted to say that our panelists are Drake McFeely, Mark Kerouac, Wendy Mantell, John Levy, Bruce Bergathon, and Chris Bogan. And thanks to all of you for joining. And so then for the third and final part, we simply want to give everyone participating tonight a chance to ask questions of Emily or Charlotte or our 6 classmates, and that will be the final part of our program. Before we get started, I just want to thank once again everyone who helped make this possible, beginning with you, Emily and Charlotte. It's late in your neck of the woods, but this really couldn't be a conversation without your willingness to join us tonight. I'm just delighted. And then, of course, our 6 panelists from the class of 76 and my fellow design teammates for their work in putting together the program. So without further ado, we should start. So let me first welcome Emily, and I'm going to just give you a little sense of her background by sharing with you her bio. So Emily is the executive director of the Loeb Center for Career Exploration and Planning. She's also special advisor to the provost at Amherst. In her role, she leads a long-range career education strategy for the college. She manages a team of 20 professionals, steers an active alumni advisory board, and collaborates broadly with faculty and colleagues across the campus. And she serves on the President's Leadership Council. Through securing philanthropic and institutional investments, Emily has built a robust and specialized career community advising model. She's reduced financial barriers to internships, strengthened career preparation for first-gen and low-income college students, and developed programmatic approaches to articulating the critical role of arts and humanities in the professional development of liberal arts students at Amherst today. Previously, Emily had roles in career development and executive education at Columbia University and positions in recruiting and human resources in the retail sector. She earned a bachelor's degree in liberal arts with a concentration in fine art from Sarah Lawrence College, and then a master's degree in organizational psychology from Teachers College at Columbia University. She's received coaching training from Columbia Coaching Certification Program and the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Emily, thank you so much again for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Charlie. It's so nice to see all of your faces tonight. And I also just want to point out that in addition to Charlotte, there's another student here in the mix. Her name is Maddie Hahn. If you could just kind of wave, Maddie. Thank you. Maddie is an intern in the Loeb Center and is serving as an embedded journalist tonight. I've asked her to take some notes and summarize some takeaways that might be really applicable to a student audience. We have a very robust website at the Loeb, and we have running blogs that we add a lot of content to for students. So we wanted to make sure that there was some kind of connection between the conversation today and maybe what would be useful to students today who are looking at our website. So I think Charlie had asked me to give you a little bit of an overview, if that's right, about career development today and the ways that Amherst has really grown to support it. I promise you it looks radically different than it did in 1976. I went to college in the 90s, and we had, maybe 1.5 staff members and in the career services office. And I just remember there basically just being a bunch of binders to kind of flip through and look at job opportunities. And that was essentially it. So that's really a very, very new day. Sorry, I just need to make sure that I've plugged in my computer. Okay, there we go. It's a really, really new day, and there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of contextual elements that are really different today. So one of the differences, this could be a whole conversation as to why this is the case, but in 1976, the majority of Amherst students went directly to graduate school after graduating. It was very common to matriculate directly into law school, medical school, business school, other programs or other structured programs like the Peace Corps. I'm always really excited when I meet alumni who went into the Peace Corps after graduation. And so these days, it varies a little bit year to year. We had a little bit of an uptick in the middle of the pandemic, but generally about 13% of Amherst students go directly into graduate school after commencement. 80% of Amherst students still do attend graduate school, but they tend to wait and attend about 3 to 5 years after graduation. So that alone is a really big difference and a reason why we need to have more of a robust infrastructure for helping students tackle employment and those very first steps. Graduate schools are not doing that job for us. So we really need to have more support and more resources really for that reason alone. But there are a lot of other pieces of the context. So I think also at the time that you graduated, I'm not going to say that the Amherst degree doesn't have the same value, but it's not enough. I think when you graduated, it was a little bit more common for employers to look at academic qualifications as a qualification for employment, that, you went to a good college, you had rigorous coursework, they might look at GPA. These days, only 37% of employers report even caring or looking or considering GPA as a measure of how they might evaluate a candidate. So the academics alone are no longer the entree. So what employers are looking for now is demonstrated work experience. They're looking to see evidence that students can translate the skills that they're building in the classroom through extracurriculars, other things that they're doing, and that they can apply it in an organizational setting. And they've already gained some of this experience that they can prove to employers. So that is a huge game changer. What that means for us is that we need to make sure that students are having those experiences right alongside their academic journey, that they're getting research opportunities with faculty. That's still very popular, and that's really good experience, but really that they're having internships in the summer. Summer internships are so important. We put a lot of our eggs in that basket at Amherst. We know that it's the big differentiator for students to be competitive for employment in today's landscape. That's just what they need to do to compete. And there are a lot of other advantages to having an internship. Obviously, you build your professional network, you test something, you test an assumption about what you might want to do. I always tell students that one of the best outcomes is if you have an internship and you come back in the fall and you tell us that you hated it. That's really, really good information, a pretty low stakes way to kind of eliminate something from your list. It's just a couple months of your life. It'll be all right. And it tells you something that helps you get to know yourself better and maybe refine your goals and refine your interests a little bit. I think the other factor, and this is nationwide, but of course, Amherst has a very deep commitment to this, is the increase in first generation and or low income students in higher ed today. This is fantastic. First gen students, lower income students, there's so much more access to higher ed today in general. And that is really, really good news. At Amherst, close to 30% of our student body now is either first in their families to attend college and or come from a lower income family. So that's really significant, and it really, again, changes what we need to do to be the institution that is really going to launch them post-graduation really successfully. That means that we are working with a lot of students who do not have the professional networks accessible to them in their families or their home communities that might really be relevant to their career goals. And so we need to make sure that they are using our networks, which is quite frankly you and all of your peers and fellow alumni, and that we're really taking great pains to make sure that students are building relationships and getting networked. That's evergreen. That hasn't changed since 1976, the importance of that. So that's another factor that really is a driver in why the Loeb Center at Amherst is a 20 staff person operation. We have a lot of different programs. We have a really, robust set of resources. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we're designed and what that model looks like. The first thing that we have in place is our career community advising model. So when I was trained in this field, I was trained to essentially be a generalist kind of coach, advisor, almost like a reference librarian to help students kind of understand how to acquire more information, but, not an expert myself. And obviously like every single potential topic or industry that a student might be interested in. So what we're able to do at the Loeb Center is we have specialists that have actually come from many, many years of working in industry. And they come and they pivot into higher ed and they lead career communities. So we have 6 of them. It's science and tech, health professions, business and finance, education professions, social impact, and arts and communication. So each of those areas has a dedicated expert advisor who has sometimes decades of experience in a relevant field. So they're bringing a lot of depth to those conversations with students. They can help the students with navigation at a much more successful level, and really create programs that are more deeply meaningful. The other huge flagship operation within the Loeb Center is our internship program. It's named for Charles Hamilton Houston, who's a really illustrious alum of the college. We fund and support over 200 students every summer, interning all over the world. The college itself, outside of the Loeb Center, supports another 200 students doing research programs on campus. So they're getting another really amazing opportunity to build skills and get close mentoring with faculty members. Another flagship program of ours is the Meiklejohn Fellows Program. So this is our dedicated career program meant for FLY students. So FLY is the acronym for first gen and our low income students. It's really embraced by the students themselves. So I might say that a lot, and that's what that means. It's a program that really tries to reach FLY students really early and make sure that they're getting good career education as early as possible. And we also make sure that they have no financial barriers to participating in an internship. Unfortunately, the vast majority of internships are unpaid in this country. I can't really control that. So what we can do is just make sure that that doesn't actually stop our students from taking advantage of getting professional development experience. And finally, and this is one of the most exciting features of our career community model, is we have what's called a TREC program. Every year we send dozens of students to different professional ecosystems around the country. This is actually now international. Last year we had our first international TREC. It was just to Toronto. I don't know if that really counts, but baby steps. This year they're going to Scotland. So we're starting to be a little bit more global. We'll get there. Our career community program directors bring groups of students, for instance, to LA to do a deep dive in the entertainment industry, Silicon Valley to do a deep dive in tech, to Washington, DC to look at nonprofit government. Charlotte can talk a little bit about that in a minute. She was one of our trekkers this year on that trek. We change them up a little bit from year to year because it helps us actually build our networks and build our knowledge base about different industries to kind of go to these different cities. Alumni really support this. They support the program completely financially. There's no cost to students to participate in this because of the generosity of alumni donors. And in each of these professional ecosystems, we build a schedule out for 4, sometimes 5 days of multiple site visits at different alumni places of work. And students really kind of open the accordion and get to see unbelievably nuanced information about the various roles and the various pathways within any particular profession. So for instance, if we go to Silicon Valley to look at tech, this is very, very typical. We'll bring 12 students with us and they all assume that they have to be software engineers and that's how you work in tech. And then they're there and they learn, oh, there's product management, there's entrepreneurship, there's venture capital. There are so many different spots and seats at the table to make that sector of the economy run. And a lot of students will often walk away with discoveries about new job titles and new opportunities that they never knew existed. So I could go on and on about TRECs because it's a very, very exciting program. But I think, one of the things that we focus on across all of these programs and across a lot of other things that are currently in development is really trying to teach students and faculty, quite frankly, about how to articulate and engage in effective storytelling about the value of a liberal arts education. From where I sit, I talk to alumni all the time. That's the great joy of my job. And I have tons of experience hearing stories about alumni who graduated from Amherst, often arts and humanities majors, who have had really rewarding, lucrative, interesting, really dynamic careers. They've pivoted a few times, they've had an impact. I know that this is true. I don't need to kind of really see statistics about it. I know that this is true. But the popular narrative in our culture really devalues the liberal arts education model and especially devalues the utility of especially taking time to study arts and humanities. And so a lot of what the Loeb Center has been engaged in recently, and I think this is really a lot of our future, is really working with the institution to make sure that our students and all of us can do a better job making that case, telling that story about the value of these skills. So I see that as being a role for the Loeb Center at Amherst, above and beyond the way that we directly support students, helping the institution really communicate that story is a huge passion of mine. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. That's kind of my overall spiel, kind of high level. Charlie, was there anything else that you wanted me to?
No, I mean, thank you. Terrific. And as I've promised my fellow team leaders, we don't want to pinch or crowd the other two sections of the program, especially since with your introduction, Emily, I know there are going to be lots of questions. So let's pause. And I'll now invite you, as we plan to introduce Charlotte, and let Charlotte give us a view of what it's like to be a student thinking about careers with the support of Emily and her team. We're so looking forward to it. So actually, let me just do this. Charlotte, to watch the clock. If you wouldn't mind, just give us a thumbnail background, a little sketch of your biography, and just launch right in, if you would, and tell us a little bit about the experience of thinking about career, what worries you, and also particularly the how you make the case for the value of the liberal arts when you're talking to employers.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I am a political science, economics, and German triple major here at Amherst, which seems like a lot. It's actually quite manageable. But I'm sure every single student at Amherst College would say the same thing. I'm from Connecticut, but I have an international background. I've lived in Austria, I've lived in the Netherlands. I'm half American, half Austrian. And so I was really thinking about international politics. I think when I lived abroad, that was really my focus of what it means to be an American and what it means to help people not only within your country, but across borders. And so that's when I really got interested in politics. So last year I was thinking, everybody tends to want to go into a job in finance, and you hear often people wanting to go to specialized institutions because that's where you can have direct career trajectory. But Amherst has actually helped me in 100 different ways, kind of deviating from the traditional trajectory that you see quite often. So last year I applied for the government and nonprofit track through the Loeb Center, and a group of 12 of us went to Washington, D.C. and learned about, what it means to work in the government or in the nonprofit sector, which was phenomenal. And you had such a diverse group of students being able to go, which is really great that Amherst is one of the most diverse institutions in the entire world, frankly, because once you leave Amherst in this day and age, you will be working in hopefully in diverse working environments. And it has completely prepared me, at least for my internships, and how to communicate with different people hailing from different backgrounds. But that was a really good experience for me. From that experience, I worked in 2 different places this summer. I was down in DC. I had funding through the Charles Houston program, which funded me for housing and other monetary needs that I had, so I could afford to live in DC. I worked for Senator Chris Murphy, who was a Williams alum. Boo. And also, I worked for the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which, if you've ever heard of Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, it's about getting, hopefully, non-propaganda news to places that don't have it. So they had a big stronghold in Ukraine right now, and they're working really quite internationally to hopefully get to send out non-propaganda news. So that's my background at the Loeb Center. I think you asked a couple of challenges that I faced as I prepare for a career. The biggest thing is entry. I think my father, he's an immigrant. He works in business. He went to a business university in Austria. So he doesn't know much about American politics, work in the political sector. And then my mother was a journalist. So that has where I've really gotten my interest as well, because she used to work for CNN. She now works for a news station in New Haven, Connecticut. But I didn't really know about any of the ways of how to apply to an internship, what things I might be interested in. Do I really want to go into public policy? Am I interested in finance? Am I interested in working in all these different types of areas? And I think the fact that Amherst gives me the ability to explore these different career paths has been really helpful to me and to a bunch of other students who don't have parents who help guide them through all of this process, which is very different, I'm sure, from your class because we talk about these fly students. Many fly students don't have the opportunities and parents and resources to help them, but with the Loeb Center, for me personally, has helped. And I've talked to a bunch of other friends and peers here at Amherst who have had support through the Loeb Center in order to enter in these career paths that they didn't think they could before. And I think the other question was about a liberal arts education. And I think now it's very difficult because you see many people going to specialized fields and going into very specific schools for engineering or for the arts or for whatever it is. And I know this might sound like a broken record, and I'm sure you all have heard this all the time, but when you talk about a liberal arts education, you talk about how Amherst teaches you how to think and problem solving skills, and instead of teaching you what to do X, Y, Z. And so I find that Amherst students tend to think outside the box, tend to think about different interdisciplinary approaches to things. So, for example, I have so many cross sections within all of my courses. So, for example, I'm in a class called Elections Around the World, and we were talking about election fraud. And then I was talking about voting systems and how that works in my economics class and how it works mathematically. And just the political implications of economics. And I'm reading regression tables about different populations and how voting works in these populations. And even in German, I'm learning about the German systems of voting. And that's just one small example, but at Amherst, you really do see the interdisciplinary approach in all different facets, which I think you don't get at a lot of other institutions. And once you transition into a career path, into an actual job, you will find a lot of interdisciplinary aspects of a career. And most people I know, some of you may have worked at the same company for your entire life, but we are really shifting to an era where you're not going to have the same job at the same company for 40 years. It's more often or not that you will be switching career paths and trajectory just because of the time that we live in. So when you think about AI, and when you think about jobs that exist now that haven't existed before, the Loeb Center is really trying to keep up with that and help students along the way. And for me, at least, it has really helped me form what I like, what I don't like, especially in the political sector. But yeah, I think that's all that I've got so far. If I've missed anything, Emily, any other questions you have?
Thank you, Charlotte. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
superb. And I know there'll be lots and lots of questions in our final section here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bob, I'm looking at the clock. We're right on time. So can I turn it over to you, and we'll go to part 2 with our classmates and their comments?
Absolutely. So the next segment of the program is sort of our version of speed dating. 6 classmates, 4 minutes each, addressing 3 questions. In a nutshell, what's your career trajectory been? How did your liberal arts education help you or maybe perhaps hinder you in that career? And what kind of advice would you give to students today and to the Loeb? And we're going to start with Drake McFeely, who, as I understand it, is someone who spent his entire career at one employer. So Drake, take it away.
All right. Yes, I did spend my entire career at one employer. And with this 4-minute limit, I apologize. This is going to be rat-a-tat real quick. My career trajectory, I made my entire career at W.W. Norton & Company. It still amazes me that in late 1976, I walked not only into publishing an industry that suited me brilliantly, but also into Norton, the nation's largest independent publishing house, one wholly owned by its employees and one that was a perfect fit for me. I've been known to call publishing the liberal arts education that never ends, and certainly that was the case for me. I started in sales with the aim of becoming an editor, which worked out, and eventually that led to the honor of running perhaps the best publishing house in the business. At Amherst, I had a terrible time picking a major. I tried so many different disciplines. And then I made my editorial career working mainly in two academic fields, economics and physics, where I had almost no classroom background whatsoever. But that's me. I love the chance to keep learning. And I had the great good fortune to learn from some of the best minds on the planet: Paul Krugman, Joseph Stiglitz, Ben Bernanke, Kip Thorne, Harold Varmus. And that's just to mention the Nobel Prize winners who entrusted their books to me. Then there was the privilege of running the company. We had a lot of success, and particularly for the Amherst students on this call, I should mention that as part of Norton's 100th anniversary celebration, I'll be doing an event at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley on Thursday night at 7. If you want to know more about publishing, please come. So what about Amherst helped me? The faculty was strong across the board. With very few exceptions, Amherst teachers allowed me to toy with my many academic interests. What about Amherst let me down? The wise Emily Griffin has beat me to it, and I'm pleased to hear that the Loeb Center's Career Services is a more mature operation now than it was in 1976. To me, Career Services then had not made the transition to match the college's desire to broaden its student body. It was still geared to a gentleman's college if you were highly motivated and wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, or if you wanted to pursue an academic path, or if you wanted to interview for a job in finance. Career Services worked well. If you were a scholarship kid like me and needed a job, but you wanted a less traditional path, well, I didn't find the interactions helpful. I'm pleased but not surprised to hear that this has changed. Advice to students today: my drive came from somewhere else than Amherst. I'm sure that's true of most of us. You're going to need to find that yourself. A good liberal arts background should leave you with plenty of intellectual curiosity, however, and the ability to bring a range of perspectives to the issues you'll face in your careers. That's more important than you may realize. And finally, to speak to a point Emily and Charlotte have raised, I understand that these days specialization is the name of the game, but there's nothing at all wrong and plenty that's right about being both a specialist and having a broad background from the liberal arts. The latter will help your creativity as you deal with the former.
Thank you, Drake, and thank you for meeting your time limit almost perfectly, which meant I didn't have to play bad cop. So
You'll get the chance, I'm sure.
I'm sure I will. So we're going to turn from Drake to Mark Kerouac, who, Emily, Charlotte, and Maddie, you may not know this, but our class has more MDs than just about any Amherst class. And Mark is one of them, but he's a doctor who ended up running a major health system, Bay State Health, based in Springfield, in an industry that's undergoing incredible transformation. So Mark.
Thanks, Bob, and good evening, everybody. Great to be with you all. Last month, as part of a leadership development program for our senior leaders, we got together about a dozen Gen Z team members to hear about their perspectives on their lives and work. And I was amazed to see how unsettled and anxious they were about their futures. They have come of age at a time of recessions and terrorist events, mass shootings and wars, racial reckonings, worrying about climate change, a pandemic, and all with the isolation of social media. And I came to appreciate that their concerns about anything they might learn today might not help them years from now. And it really had led to a sort of craving for marketable, practical skills. As I look back on my own career trajectory, I wasn't going to provide them much help about the predictability of the world. Yes, I was a biology major at Amherst and went on to medical school and graduated back in 1980. All of that was pretty predictable. But since then, I have had 6 separate jobs, not one of which existed when I graduated. There was no HIV/AIDS, where I practiced for 20 years, no application of quality or safety science to medical practice, no use of computers in medicine, no push to contain healthcare costs, no large systems of hospitals employing doctors, never mind doctors being in charge of large health systems. And there was no appreciation for the role social factors played in the health of communities. So as I think about, all the STEM courses I took back at Amherst, I think of them sort of like stepping stones. They enabled me to move to the next level of practical skills, but I constantly had to refresh and upgrade them to stay current. The ideals of lifelong learning was something that I did pick up at Amherst, and that did help me a lot in a rapidly changing world. But I never went back to any of those STEM books that I read in college, just like you don't go back to a stepping stone once you've stepped off of it. I have gone back, though, to reread many of the classics from my high school and college days, like Camus' The Plague, when I was in the midst of caring for AIDS patients in the early days of that pandemic, or Shaw's Doctor's Dilemma, when I was wrestling with the issue of allocating scarce resources. Henry V in the St. Crispin Day speech, when I was talking about to my organization about how to step up to the COVID pandemic just recently. I've had a regular diet of history and biography and fiction all through my professional career. And lately, and this may be a drawback at Amherst, I've expanded to more diverse voices than those I encountered in the 1970s to help broaden my own perspectives. Most recently, Ellen Sirleaf Johnson's memoir, The First Woman President of an African Country and Nobel Peace Prize winner. So rather than stepping stones, the humanities have been foundation stones for me. They've dealt with timeless questions about how to live a good life, how to deal with adversity and conflict, how to adapt to change, how to be a good team member, how to lead a team, and how to understand and respect people whose worldviews are different from yours. As I've gotten older and transitioned into leadership roles, I'm dealing less and less with the technical issues and more with issues of the human heart, how to manage my own emotions in the face of stress and change, and how to get people to care about and work on the right things in an uncertain world so that we can make a difference in our community. And so for all those things, I think my preparation at Amherst and my ongoing reading in all those areas has been an indispensable foundation.
Any word of advice to students today, like in a nutshell?
Keep a balance. I think that, you don't want to sort of focus too early. I love the triple major thing, Charlotte. And I was happy to see that Senator Murphy is a big champion of loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness affecting our country. He's really spoken out eloquently about that. And who knew that would be something we would study and think about and worry about these days. So I think even if you were to choose a STEM career, don't focus too early and realize that that foundation in the humanities is going to serve you well, even if you do become an engineer, a doctor, or whatever.
Okay, now we're going to turn to Wendy Mantell, one of the first women graduates of Amherst, and who I think, like a lot of our classmates, Wendy, you've had a career where you were sort of doing something in sort of the corporate world, and then you totally reinvented yourself at midlife. So you have the lectern.
Okay, thanks, Bob. And I'd like to thank Emily and Charlotte and Drake and Mark for terrific thoughts on the value of the humanities, and in particular, the value of career coaching, a topic that's near and dear to me. At any rate, I'm going to give you 3 things to start. And I'll tell you what Amherst gave to me. Then I'm going to give you a quick summary of my career path. And I'll close with 3 things that I would love to see Amherst do today to help prepare students for the work world. So Amherst gave me 3 things that I've used throughout my career. 1, the creative power of analytical thinking. And I have to give Benjamin DeMott a lot of credit for that. Although I was first very intimidated by him, I actually found a way to deliver what he was looking for in my tests. And he really helped me understand, by analyzing Shakespeare, how to stretch my creativity. And I applied that throughout my career. Persuasive finesse, Amherst gave me that too, and showed me how to research, present, and sell a compelling viewpoint. And 3, it gave me an understanding how important it is to find the right environment for yourself. And this was mentioned earlier, regardless of whether it's academic, work, or personal. You need to know what's right for you. Amherst gave me roots and wings. In fact, I actually didn't want to leave the nest when I graduated. And in a way, through my role as the class agent for the Amherst Fund, I never have. So it feels very good to be on webinars like this, where I see a lot of familiar faces. I came to Amherst through the 12 College Exchange Program, and I became one of Amherst's 9 first female grads. I dreamed of teaching college level English. Happily, I nailed the first step by getting into a really good MA PhD program at Columbia. And what made me choose Columbia, which was my first choice, was that I'd taken an amazing course at Amherst on the picaresque novel, and I was fascinated with that genre. Picaro, just by the way, is a Spanish word. Refers to somebody who can't live within society and can't live without it. So they exist on the outer fringes. Don Quixote was a picaro. So I thought was Jack Kerouac, and he and the beatnik movement from the late 40s to the mid 60s became a focus of my master's thesis. However, Columbia said on the first day of grad school orientation that there would be no college level teaching jobs for the next decade. So I turned to my buddy Walter Maroney and said, "Why are we here?" And he said, "I don't know." And he left and went into law, and I left and went into healthcare. I thought about what else I loved besides English, because I had to come up with something. And as a kid, I'd always been fascinated by medicine. I couldn't stand the sight of blood, and I couldn't dissect a frog, but I loved learning about medicine and writing about it. So I coincidentally combined my love of medicine and my writing skills and became a medical writer. My first job was serving as a writer and editor at the American Cancer Society headquarters in Manhattan. After a couple of years of doing that, I was ready to move on and earn a for-profit salary. So I became a promotional copywriter for a company named Springer Verlag, which was a major medical and scientific publisher. That gave me my first taste of the advertising world. And I wanted to go towards advertising and, sorry, Drake, away from publishing while keeping a medical focus.
Wendy, you're at time. So could you maybe conclude by, from your perspective today as a career coach, what kind of advice would you give to students today?
Thanks for letting me know. I have 3 things that I feel are really important for success and that I'd recommend Amherst do to prepare students. Number 1, teach presentation skills, learn presentation skills. How smooth you are on your feet tells people a lot about whether you know your stuff or not. 2, understand and develop people skills such as networking, listening, consultative selling, negotiating. That's going to be relevant across the board from your initial job interviews to top management. And 3rd, know and be able to articulate your brand, your unique selling proposition, that thing that sets you apart and why that's meaningful to your employer or customers. Enthusiasm can be contagious.
Thanks. Next is John Levy, the American Studies major, who became CEO of a quantum computing company. John, take it away, and a serial entrepreneur.
Thanks. So, after learning from my experience in freshman year, when Frank and I were roommates and Charlie was next door, that, the subject matter you learned around and reading lists weren't the best criteria for determining what classes to take, it dawned on me that what really mattered most were professors and departments. And as far as I could tell at that time, in 1973, the department that seemed most compelling to me was the American Studies department. And I recognize a number of you who are part of that. And as intellectually satisfying as that was, and it was pretty great, it wasn't until later that I developed, I think, a more nuanced understanding that the content of what I was learning was far less important than actually how I was learning. The ability, and I think other people have said it, the ability to think critically as an engaged learner, explore avenues of creativity, embrace interdisciplinary approaches like Charlotte talked about, and developing clear communication skills were at the core of what was really helping me to grow. And frankly, that content was secondary. So how to get from AmStuds to quantum computing? From an experience perspective, it was, I was 2 years at HBS, a decade of starting new tech businesses, 5 years of working for Paul Allen in a Silicon Valley think tank, where, by the way, we invented the virtual background that I'm using today in 1995. I ran 2 venture capital funds. I chaired a spin out from IBM. And finally, the CEO of a company called Seek, where we're designing and manufacturing chips and systems for quantum computers, which, for those of you who don't know, is the first new computing paradigm since the invention of the digital computer in the 1940s. But while at Amherst, notably, I didn't take any classes in economics, physics, or computer science, subjects that are on the nose for what I do today. And yet I lead a company, one of 10 in the world, where we've built a truly fully functional quantum computer. So what's my job? First, I have the enviable task of explaining what a quantum computer is. And I do that to a diverse set of audiences, literally from physicists at CERN to members of Congress to high school students. The second is strategy development, where we compete with the largest companies in the world. We compete with IBM and Google and Intel and Microsoft and Amazon. And my job is to guide our strategy to be unique and defensible, attractive from an investment perspective, useful to governments and multinationals, and frankly, compelling enough to attract some of the most, in-demand engineers in the world. Third, quantum computing exists at the intersection of experimental and theoretical physics, electrical engineering, computer science, material science. So cross-disciplinary thinking and development are at the core of what we do. And then finally, my job, frankly, is to learn. I'm a student every day learning from my incredibly generous and gracious and gifted colleagues about, the strange phenomenon of quantum mechanics and how we can harness this strangeness to accomplish, useful and valuable outcomes. So in other words, my 4 jobs are to communicate, be creative, work in an interdisciplinary field, and think creatively. And think critically, I should say, exactly what we all did at Amherst and what we've heard from nearly all of you. So what would I study now or advise a newly matriculating Amherst student? I think I'd still look towards what the school is best at and gravitate there, knowing that a George Kateb, for instance, comes along only once. And if you're interested in technical areas, I'd use my college time to explore those and maybe not focus as deeply as you can. So I would study quantum physics and I would study computer science, but I'd also take classes in philosophy and any subject, could be history, art, econ, American studies, gender studies, whatever, that requires you to write and speak at a high level, learn those presentation skills, which frankly brings us right back to a liberal arts education.
Great.
And one last thought.
That's not real quick.
Yeah, which is that many of us have had kind of meandering careers, and that sense of adaptability, I think, is the other thing that's really, really critical. And those skills that we have enable us to be adaptable, and I think that's as useful today as ever.
Okay, next, Bruce Bergathon, who's sort of the representative of the nonprofit sector on our panel. Bruce was the general manager of a university-based public radio station for many years. Bruce.
I feel exactly like I'm back in an Amherst classroom. It's like everybody's better prepared than me. So I'm just going to wing it, which is kind of what I did while I was at Amherst. I thought I was going to be an anthropology professor So I majored in anthropology. Anthropology was kind of on its last trajectory at that time. So that wasn't a good career plan. No one told me that. Through my extensive personal connections in the corporate world, I got a job as a salesperson. It should have hung with Drake McFeely because I really wanted to go into publishing. I remember a weekend in New York where I like handed out 60 resumes to no avail whatsoever to all the publishers in New York. But anyway, so I was a drug salesman, legitimate drugs, like over-the-counter drugs, for 2 years. Hated that, and remembered all the good times I had had in Amherst with some of the faces I see here, like Rob and Dare and Steve in the Amherst Glee Club or in the Amherst Orchestra, as well as the hours I spent trying to convince people that John Coltrane was the solution to whatever problem they had at WAMH. So I pulled all of that together and went back to graduate school at Temple University and got a degree in mass communications. Really just thinking, I'm going to be a public radio person. And so that's what happened. I met the guy who invented All Things Considered and who discovered Terry Gross. He was on my thesis committee. And he said, you know what? New York, Philadelphia, Seattle, Portland, they don't need public radio stations. Go somewhere deep in the middle of the country and get a job there. So I went to New Mexico and worked there for 10 years. And then came here to Bloomington Normal, Illinois, which is a town of about 150,000 people. And have had a very satisfying career, in my mind, basically building community around information that was useful and maybe not that accessible to people other than through public media. It's been a great career. I've had fun every day. I got to interview ambassadors to many countries, poets, writers, Sun Ra, Sonny Rollins, Earl Father Hines. I can't complain about my life. What did I learn from Amherst? I think I knew that having fun was a great career objective when I went there. And I just feel like Amherst gave me a lot of opportunities to have transformative experiences, learn how to think critically. And I understand that that's not so appealing to my kids, one of whom is an energy trader and the other of whom works for Caterpillar, a big equipment manufacturer. But I think they're jealous that I've had so much fun. So I don't know about giving advice to the current generation, but Amherst was great. Excuse me, I need wine here. Amherst was a great place for me to sort of blossom and learn things.
Great.
And I've been able to keep doing that. So
Thanks so much.
no notes. Could you tell?
Well done. Last but far from least, my fellow Thorovian, Chris Bogan, who majored in English and founded his own company. Chris.
Thanks, Bob. Bob's prompt was take 47 years and turn it into a Taylor Swift ballad in 4 minutes. So I'll see if I can take that prompt. So I was an English major, philosophy minor, and like others, I've navigated 4 big career pivots in the last, for almost 5 decades. I think about the line from Kierkegaard where he said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And that really resonates for me. I imagine it resonates for lots of us. It just, you can't see it when you're going forward. Things are connected and they make sense. When I was at Amherst, I was a hardcore English major. I took too many English classes. I was focused on poetry, I finagled authoring a book of original poems in lieu of doing the hard work of writing a senior thesis. My game plan for all 4 years was get a PhD in literature. Why? I had no good reason. I had a lot of book richness, but I was very experienced poor. I couldn't imagine what all these other careers would be like. I just thought that's what I'd do. Well, halfway through senior year, I realized that is a really bad idea, and I bagged it. So I pivoted, and I think a lot of us are, some of these pivots are so important. I accepted a daily newspaper job in Twin Falls, Idaho, which at the time was only known because that's where Evel Knievel tried to jump the Snake River Canyon. And I went there and had a really fantastic time. And during 10 years working for daily newspapers, I lived in 4 states, 6 cities, from Spokane to Dallas to Boston to Miami. I learned an important lesson that I think the nation should learn, which is you can have a good life, you can have a really good life and make good friends in red states and blue states. 5 years into my newspaper career, I got lucky. I won a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard. It gave me the chance to audit classes in biology, religion, philosophy, law, business, and government. And I discovered that this great big universe was so much bigger than my sense of it as an English major. My career path was very, it's not a straight line. It's more like sailing. It's like tacking back and forth, but you're always trying to steer towards some bright spot on the horizon. Like John, I went back to the Harvard Business School and earned an MBA. When I graduated, I raised venture capital and set out to purchase community newspapers. It felt pretty near and dear to me. Oddly, I got lucky again. In the midst of it, our family had an apartment fire that burned everything down. We lost everything deep in the Boston winter of 1989. Andy Himes, a classmate, showed up and gave me a bunch of clothes that I ended up wearing, not fitting very well, 3 or 4 days later. And I went to work at a startup company, which is a consulting firm, and did that for about 4 years. Then I had an idea and I founded a company. It's actually grown into Best Practices, the company I've led for the last 30 years. We're basically a specialized research publishing database company in the pharmaceutical industry, so in healthcare. A big lesson from all that: move forward, with purpose, with passion, with care, but be ready to pivot, because opportunities or threats will show up when you never expect them. My Amherst liberal arts education gave me many gifts. I think some of them I've heard echoed here. For me, Bill Kennick's philosophy courses taught me how to unravel really knotty problems. Armour Craig's English composition and Bill Pritchard's poetry classes taught me how to write clearly. They also taught me the power of empathy, which proved to be very important when I became a leader of a company. I tried to see opportunities in small towns and big towns, and my Amherst mentors really lifted me up higher than I could have ever dreamed or dared on my own. So relationships are so important. There were lessons that Amherst didn't teach me, and I wish they could have. I wish I could have learned earlier the value and importance of public speaking. I wish I could have understood the importance of collaboration and leadership skills. Much of my life took place in groups and in teams, and I had very little background in any of that. Finally, I wish I'd learned earlier that many people who would become my closest friends for life, they didn't look like me, they didn't think like me, but they were dear friends, and those relationships mattered. So in a way, learning to read the quality of people, the quality of their characters, maybe that's what really an Amherst English major was really taught to learn and believe. And for me, it's been very important.
Great.
I'll close at that.
That's great, Chris. Charlie, back to you for Q&A and discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris, Bruce, John, Wendy, Mark, and Drake. We are miraculously on time. So the third and final part of our program is an invitation to our class to ask questions of our panelists or Charlotte or Emily. And I'm going to do my best to monitor a couple of things you might do if you're technically inclined. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something called reactions. If you click on that, you should see a raise your hand icon. I'll be scanning my screens. to be as fair as I can to pick off that little icon, but if you just literally raise your hand like this, I'll notice you too, and I'll try to get a list going here. So without further ado, would love to open it up for questions.
So,
Chris?
Charlie, I'll ask one.
Yep.
So I use the AI, I use Bard and Chat GPT every day. It's really gotten into my life in a big way. So two things I did which were interesting. I went and looked at the majors at Amherst and was stunned to realize that the top majors that were there when we were in place are now not even listed. It's math, it's economics and others. And I wonder, and I asked this to, to Maddie, to Charlotte, to Emily, how are these questions that the great teachers of our time getting into a student body that is taking math, computers and economics and things that we didn't, and how is that playing out so that that it can help them be better? Because I think a lot of us have said, as you got older, you never thought the things that would be important would be about people, would be about communicating, about standing up in front of a group, things that Amherst did not prepare me at all to think about. How are those things playing into the math, computer science, and the very practical majors that are so in demand in our job markets today?
Yeah, I can start. So being an economics major myself, a lot of it you will see in the core classes. It's very heavily based on doing your work, doing your problem sets, figuring it out, and doing well on an exam. But with a lot of the extracurriculars that you have to take for these majors, they are very collaborative. So, for example, I have a close friend who is a biophysics major, and it is mandatory for those majors to take HSTEM, which is human in STEM, which emphasizes the point of being a human in STEM and creating those relationships and working with people and working with patients, especially if you're on the pre-med track, and learning the interconnectivity between humanities and STEM and how you work through that, because you cannot have one without the other, especially if you're focused in math, science, biology, all those things. At one point in time, you're going to have to interact with others, and these other courses that are put in place at Amherst hopefully are trying to help especially STEM majors look at it in a more liberal arts, through a liberal arts lens, especially because that's the trajectory in which we're going. And also with AI, I mean, I use it quite often as well, just honestly as Google at this point. And it's taken a toll in some places, but also has helped me significantly in generating ideas, I'm writing a Flushing. It's a research paper right now, but I'm also writing poetry, and it's about this old dark tale of children's literature that I grew up on, because I'm Austrian, so they have very dark children's literature. But I'm using these generative AIs to help me form a different type of literature, because I'm writing the book itself. And so it's helped a lot in the classroom, but also can have some of setbacks when it comes to liberal arts and learning how to write. But when it comes to Amherst, I think we do put a very large emphasis on human in STEM and integrating people who are doing STEM-oriented classes and making sure that they also know how to write, know how to have all these skills. And that's why our first year seminar is really, really important. I took a first year seminar that was taught by a philosophy professor, and it was called Progress, which was assessing whether or not we have progressed as a society. One of the best classes I've ever taken. And so just the emphasis of reading and writing and communicating, and it was group work and it was critically thinking. Amherst is still emphasizing that, even though we are shifting, I mean, just as a society, not Amherst in general, into a more STEM-oriented world. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Maddie.
Oh, yeah. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was just gonna say, with regards to like AI and ChatGPT. That's actually one of the things that we're doing in my final geology class for our final project is we actually have to use ChatGPT and look at something that that ChatGPT is generating and kind of engage with it ourselves because in this world, things are changing so quickly. And so the professor wanted us to really be able to engage with ChatGPT. So that's what we're doing in my oceanography class.
Thank you, Charlotte and Maddie. I picked off the next following, Kenneth, Bob, Ruth, and Ted. So Kenneth, your hand was up. It's your turn. Are you there?
If you're speaking, Ken, you're on mute.
Yeah, check to make sure you're okay. Kenneth, we'll keep you in the queue, but since we're not hearing from you, Bob, you're up next.
Yeah, I have a question for Emily. You know, in the last 76 Connects, we had Austin Serrett and Aidan Orr and our classmate Paul Smith talk about the liberal arts and the crisis of democracy. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Interns for Democracy program that you just started at the Loeb.
Wow, thanks for queuing that up for me. Yeah, this is a really for those who don't know, it's a really important overall initiative for our new president. I think I can still call him our new president, Michael Elliott. Really, really important to him to make the case for liberal arts education ultimately being valuable to the public good, especially with our challenges with democracy right now. So what we have done, so there's a group on campus called Amherst Students for Democracy that's led by Aidan Orr and a few other students. And they have started a campaign to get their peers to sign a pledge, like a pledge to support democracy, you know, pledge for democracy in some way. And that could mean volunteering at their local, you know, election office. It could mean, you know, doing other kinds of community service oriented work, or it could mean having an internship in a pro-democracy organization. And that's where we come in. So what we did, we knew that this was happening. And they have now, they launched the pledge last Wednesday, and they have 250 students have already signed the pledge, which is really exciting. So what the Loeb Center is doing is catching those students who want to follow through on their commitment by interning. And we have a special Interning for Democracy pathway program where they get mentoring from our program director for careers and social impact. We'll be connecting them with alumni mentors, doing special community building, career development activities with them before they go into their internships. And we are guaranteeing that we will fund their internships. So we're putting a lot of muscle behind that to make sure that we can support them. But what's exciting about it, there are a lot of things that are exciting, but I've been hearing from students for years that students who are really interested in social impact, in something in, you know, along these lines, feel a little isolated. You know, I think the visuals and the kind of conversation on campus still seems to cluster around finance and consulting to such a large degree, no matter what we do to build out all of these other career communities. And so we really hope that we can play a part in helping these students find each other, connect, have a shared sense of purpose and mission through their professional development. So we can kind of support that effort a little bit.
Thanks, Emily. Ruth, you're up next. Ruth, if you're there, I see you're muted. So if you're trying to get through, you might try to unmute. Okay, we'll keep you in the queue. Kenneth, I see you're on. Let's go back to you. If you'd like to, you may ask a question, and if you would, just make sure you unmute. Okay, we'll keep them both in the queue. Ted, you're up next.
I'm back on, and
Okay.
I actually withdrew my question because it was asked by the first person around how do you get people, students at Amherst re-engaged in this whole notion of a liberal arts education when they're so focused on specialization. And if I could just take a minute and say that my experience is really parallel to everybody's, although I probably went the other way. I was in medicine first, and then went into the pharmaceutical industry, where I've done a lot of different things. And I think the key parts that have been echoed are things like know how to think critically, learn how to write, learn how to speak, be flexible and be resilient, because as was pointed out, we've all been in a bunch of different jobs in the different companies, and that's just the way it's going to be. And so we have to get through kids to make sure they understand what the basics are that they have to learn to be happy and successful. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Kenneth. Ted, you got your hand up? Ted Jacobuzio. And
I
you're muted.
do,
There-
I
there
do.
you go.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, so the first thing is that I was really, really, really like interested to hear everybody talk about presentation skills as something that ought to be learned, because this is something that I did not expect to be able to. I didn't even know I had the skill, to tell you the truth. You know, for years I was, you know, a lowly scribbler, and then when I jumped into the consulting business, it turned out that I could present information. You know, I was okay at it. And in fact, a dear friend, a colleague of mine, my specialty when I was an analyst was consumer credit, especially credit cards. And this guy used to make fun of me. He used to say, "Did you know that credit cards were made out of plastic? Listen to this guy. He knows what he's talking about." Meaning I could put it across. So it was an extremely, I'm kind of going to think about this for a while. I mean, I've heard like everybody say that presentation skills were, you know, very, very important in a career. And this, I thought it was just me, you know, so that's all for what it's worth. The other thing I'd like to say is this. Last time I was at Amherst was in 2018. There was a big hoop-de-doo. Taubman had just completed his Gorbachev biography. And so my son, who was a Russian language minor, or I guess you're always a Russian language minor, it's like being a Marine, right? I brought him up there to meet Taubman and to meet all these different people. And Stanley Rabinowitz retired that weekend, it turned out. So he gave a big talk in the art gallery. It went on for a while, but it was that doesn't mean that it was not compelling. It was very compelling. And one of the things he said was that at Brooklyn College, he had a B average because he had requirements. Which means that he had to take science courses and he had to take math courses. Now I'm gonna reveal myself as being an ignoramus. There are no requirements in Amherst still. Am I right about that? No.
There are no requirements. No.
No, there are no requirements.
Except for first year.
So
summer.
imagine that there's a scale 1 to 10, right? And 1 means you don't know what you're talking about, and 10 means you're really proficient. Kids coming in as freshmen, if they're STEM kids, if they're quant heads, right? They're much more likely to be 7s or 8s than liberal arts kids are likely to be 7s or 8s. The liberal arts kids, I mean, a STEM kid coming into Amherst is going to know calculus, right? Going to know all this very quantitative stuff, whereas a liberal arts kid is going to be, you know, I read Great Expectations and I thought it was really terrific. You know, so tell me what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that maybe it's not a bad idea to think about requirements for everybody, but basing them in the liberal arts. You know, the kid who comes to Amherst and is going to have read Paradise Lost and have an opinion about Ezra Pound's, you know, rediscovery of quantity in English verse is going to be really, really rare. A kid who comes there who's mastered calculus is probably not going to be rare at all. So maybe it's not a bad idea if we explored requirements precisely in non-STEM
disciplines, because what I'm getting out of Amherst, everything I can see, and I confess my ignorance, I didn't know, I suspected that there were no requirements. Now I know that there are no requirements. My impression of the school is that it's kind of like a technical education. It's not a liberal arts education anymore. And I worry about that. I really do. I worry about that. I worry about these kids coming in, bing, bing, bing. They get the STEM skills. They go out and they get a job at McKinsey or they get a job at Citibank, and then they just sort of take off. What I heard from Bogan is something very different, something completely non-linear and really interesting, and something that it's non-linear, but it parallels. You get what I'm saying? Something that resonates with me. But I worry about the school if it's all STEM all the time. And I'm wondering whether maybe the old English 11 discipline, which meant that you got beat up if you couldn't put a sentence together, wouldn't be a bad thing. So now I'll shut up.
So could I add something just to build on and maybe put a smile on Ted's face? I'm not sure there's a requirement, but the new president, I think, believes in quiet nudges. So I'm one of the things I'm happy in, and I'll blow the horn on it, is I'm on the board of the Emily Dickinson Museum, which is a place that was very important to me during my Amherst there. For the first time in Amherst history, every Amherst freshman now visits the Emily Dickinson Museum during their first week or month of school, something that never happened in the past. So there's a sort of a gentle nudge towards maybe more of the liberal arts among the very bright STEM students.
Ed,
Okay.
I'm gonna just intervene. You're onto something big. And I'd like to take this back to the design committee to see if we might think about another session on just where you are. I do want to honor Jordan and John, whose hands have been up, simply because we're coming to the end of the time now. But thank you, Ted. A lot to think about there. Let's turn to you, Jordan. You've been patiently waiting. It's your turn.
Emily, I wanted to ask about how Amherst is perceived amongst employers and how Amherst students are considered different from others. And are there a lot of recruiters coming, and just kind of the whole relationship with employers?
Sure. So our relationship with employers, there are a couple industries, finance and consulting, that for generations have really been our strengths and continue to be. There's been no drop off in that. The difference with recruiting for those employers is that a lot of employers, especially in the finance space right now, are moving away from having a core school model, meaning that they have a few schools that they pretty much use for all of their analyst classes every year. And those schools are usually the alma maters of their top brass. That's really changing because those companies themselves are, realizing that they haven't made much progress on diversifying their workforces. I know the irony is that Amherst is extremely diverse, and so that they should still recruit with us, but we're kind of caught in the crosshairs there with like overall corporate policy. We still, the industries that can afford to send teams of recruiters to campus for true on-campus recruiting are still finance, consulting. Tech doesn't really do that, even though they can afford it. They have never really gone all in on that kind of a recruiting model and have backed away from it pretty quickly for equity reasons as well. We have about 150 employers who recruit with us directly every year, but most of it is virtual now. So yeah. But it's across a range of industries, but the on-campus, the true kind of on-campus recruiters coming to campus continues to be pretty much clustered in finance and consulting, which will add to students' perception that this is the only thing that students are going into, or it's the only thing that Loeb is doing anything about, which is totally untrue, but unfortunately kind of hard to work our way around that.
How do you sell Amherst students compared to other universities or other colleges?
It's the interdisciplinary thinking. So what we hear from employers, and it's not what we hear anecdotally, this is research that we get every year from our professional organization. What employers are looking for year after year are communication skills, problem solving ability, and ability to work on a team. So we can coach students on demonstrating that. Our students absolutely develop those capacities very, very, very clearly. Those are strengths for them. What the feedback we hear from employers typically will be that our students are, I mean, Charlotte said this, think outside the box, extremely bright, really nimble. Sometimes they're a little green. Sometimes they need a little polishing up in their first few months on a job, maybe compared to somebody with a more technical education from a place like Wharton. But they catch up really quickly, and then they're really, they're highly valued for especially the interdisciplinary skill set.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Emily. John, you're up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. This is really for Emily, Charlotte, and Maddie. And that is, in a world in which GPA is devalued or less relevant, let's just say, at least from an employment perspective, and I don't know what it is with respect to graduate school, but why are there grades at all at Amherst College at this point? And might it actually be a way to get STEM students to take non-STEM classes and non-STEM students to take STEM classes so that it's less risky and enables, kind of a more interesting exchange?
I find that idea to be thrilling, but you have to remember that I went to Sarah Lawrence College, where we had no grades, no majors, no tests. So I'm coming from a very kind of radical education model, and that idea, I think, has a ton of merit. I do not speak for the institution or for my boss, the provost, when I say that, but it's just me, Emily Griffin, my personal. I think that's really interesting, and I do think that concern about performance is probably one factor that might, convince some students to not explore as broadly as they otherwise would. Concern about performance, concern about, the value and utility to employment. There's a lot there. There are a lot of reasons why students might hold back from fully taking advantage of the open curriculum. Graduate schools definitely still do care about GPA. So for, graduate school, it is important to have some kind of record, and it is important for students, especially if they're pursuing academic PhD pathways or want to keep that option open. It's going to be important. But yeah, you're right, for employers, it doesn't. And I love to tell students that. But most students have graduate school in their mind as something that they're probably.
Right, but they're still testing. They're still, sort of.
No, you're right. Letters of recommendation, absolutely. I know.
What I find within students is that you have to remember that Amherst is such a prestigious institution still. And if you take the concept of grades away, it takes away this concrete idea that you're great, that you're a great student. Here is my transcript. Here is the name brand that I have. And I think that is what scares students from going to Hampshire College, for example, that has no grades, and it's kind of taken within the Amherst student body as a joke a bit. And I think because of this, just the concept of Amherst College in general, that's why it's very difficult when you're talking about grades. And grades also is an external motivator to do well. I mean, maybe or maybe not, depending on Amherst students in general just want to be successful. So for Amherst students, I actually think that they still would excel greatly. But you have those external factors really impeding the idea that, this is end all be all. This shows how I deserve to be here, which is tough.
Thanks, Charlotte and Emily. I'm looking at the clock. We've got a couple of minutes to go. Steve, your hand is up, so I'm going to lateral over to you and Bob. If there are any housekeeping issues, Steve, you have your hand up, so you may have a question, but I want to honor our guests and our participants to keep to the clock. So
Sure. I'll turn it back to Bob, but just a quick thank you to everybody, especially our guests. And just sort of a quick observation to throw out for people to think about in the future, in addition to helping us think about other topics. A number of people that I talked to about this asked an obvious question: will students be participating? And as you can see, we've had a couple of really insightful students join us, as well as Emily from campus. One of the goals of this whole 76 Connects program is a kind of an intergenerational experiment. I don't exactly know how to conduct that, but I think this gives us an idea of how interesting it would be to figure out how to have continued conversation with, between our classes and the generation. So something for the future I'd like everybody to think about. And many, many thanks again to all. It's been great seeing everybody. Bob, let me flip it back to you or to Charlie for closing.
Yeah, I just have one housekeeping matter. When we close out the call, you should get in your browser a survey with a few questions about tonight's session. What did you like? What didn't you like? What would you suggest for improvement? Are there topics that you'd like to see us address in the future? I think it's going to work. I'm not quite the Zoom expert that Paul Smith is. I think it's going to work. If it doesn't, we'll contact you by email with the same questions, but just keep an eye out when we close off for that brief survey. And thanks, everybody. This has been a great turnout. It's just really exciting to be discussing these issues with you.
Thanks, Bob. And
Thank you.
Come to the end of our time. I want really to extend heartfelt gratitude to you, Emily, Charlotte, Maddie. Thanks to you for joining us. And then to Drake, Mark, Wendy, John, Bruce, and Chris for your contributions tonight. And of course, to all of you in the audience, because the whole point was to have a connection. And I, for one, am delighted that we've had this mix of voices and a chance for our class to get together again. So thanks to all, and stay tuned. The committee, the design team is going to go back to work, and we all hope that we'll have other sessions like this with good stuff to talk about in the near future.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thanks,
night,
Bob.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Matt,
Great to
Sure.
see you all.
bye-bye, everybody.
Take care now.
Bye.